You gonna do a cold start for us, Thomas?
Yeah.
A lot of times Thomas likes to get us started with a cold story. Some call it an icebreaker. I call it like just coming out of nowhere.
Welcome back to another episode of The Sage. Today is a very interesting conversation we're going to have. Before we get into that, I'd like to introduce who we have here with us. You know him and you love him. The Silver Fox himself, Mr. Robert Beckman. How are you?
Thank all my family members for listening, and I appreciate it.
Yes, and we mustn't forget the smartest man in the room, Paul, our producer. Thank you so much, Paul, for doing this for us and with us.
We mess it up and he cleans it up.
Yes.
That's our motto.
And welcome to the podcast, Kevin. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
By the way, also known as Cabo.
Cabo.
Should
we just go with that for the rest of the...
Feel free.
Right ahead.
Cabo.
You're not obligated, but it's something to think about. By the way, shout out to Cabo Drums, a designer and builder of drums, as well as
That's
a
right.
player of drums.
That's right. That's pretty sweet, actually. Not many people can say that.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, it's it's a neat little hobby that I picked up and enjoyed.
You know how some people might idolize the idea of having like a man cave and their hobby, their passionate is just on display? You should go to a Cabo room where the drums are out, like where all the kits are out. It's
pretty cool.
It's a pretty happy place.
Now, like, how do you get shells, or you make the shells, or?
I've done it a couple of different ways. I don't actually make the shell.
Uh-huh.
There's the process to do that is pretty involved, and you have to have a certain equipment that's just So what I found
Because you're
out,
bending wood, right?
So
You're
what's-
steaming and bending wood mostly.
So what started the whole thing for me is I had the same drum set since I was in 8th grade. And fortunately, it's an amazing kit. So, it served me well all these years. But over time, I got to be an adult and, had a little bit of resources and decided, you know what, buy me a new kit. And I knew what I wanted. I had seen enough and, had gotten pretty specific about what I wanted. When I started looking for kits that were exactly what I wanted, I realized that what I wanted was actually a custom kit. Well, when you start pricing the custom kits, it's insane. Talking $5,000-$6,000, even more.
Yeah.
And somehow I stumbled on to the information that almost all of the custom drum builders buy their shells from the same place.
Okay.
Oh.
They're called Keller shells.
Huh.
And you can buy the shell, and they make these.
No, we're not sponsored by Keller Shells,
right.
but that's a free offer right there.
Sure.
Yeah, Keller, come on, let's go.
And they don't even just make the shells are not even necessarily for drums. Like they use them for like pillars and things.
Oh, wow.
But you can buy them, and so you can either buy them the exact size that you want, or you can buy like the long tubes, and then you can cut them to the lengths that you want.
Oh.
So I did that and cut the drums exactly the right size that I wanted. Did all the staining. The trick is the bearing edge, the slanted handles around the top. So I had to build, use a router table for that, but a typical router table doesn't work exactly because the bass drums are usually too big.
Correct.
So I had to custom build my own router table and there's things you have to do to make sure that it stays perfectly flat.
So that's an interesting hobby. Is there a hobby that requires a multidisciplinary stuff?
You're right.
Because I had to make the tools to make the drum.
Yeah, that's right.
And
I
think
answer your question-
precision is important, right? Like you get one part off and the whole deal's off.
Yeah. I redid a few. But to answer your question, though, I've done it that way, but then I've also bought older kits and then just completely strip them down. And so I would use those shells. There's one particular brand drum that it's made in England, and I discovered somehow I stumbled onto the fact that they're amazing shells and they're really inexpensive drums. Like people don't think anything of them. You find them in pawn shops or
What's the brand?
used. Premier.
Oh, actually, I had a Premier kit. That's
Yeah.
fine.
Oh, that's right.
So-
By the way, fun fact: Thomas is also a drummer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This could go on for a while.
We could
now.
do this. This could turn into
Oh,
a
no.
drum podcast. But long story short, I found out this one particular model, the shells sound amazing.
Yeah.
So I started buying a couple of those when I would find them. The kit I made for the church is a set of those shells. And then the kit that I use when I play out, like a gig, that's the kit I use.
That's awesome.
So I have like the one that I made like pristine from the beginning is the with the Keller shells. That's kind of like my studio kit. It sort of stays indoors.
That's cool.
And then the other kit is the one that can get banged up a little bit.
Can travel.
Yeah.
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 By the way, yeah, he plays a lot of different gigs,
That's right.
and a lot of genres of music.
Yeah.
Country and western. I mean, it can swing pretty wildly for this guy.
Rock, classic.
Do you have a favorite genre at the moment to play?
To play? Not particularly. Actually, what I really enjoy is we do a lot of mashup songs.
Oh, I can see that being fun.
We'll combine like the zombie the cranberries zombie. We mix that with In the Air Tonight, Phil Collins.
Okay.
And
I can
See, even they haven't heard that version.
yeah,
I mean,
right. And it's,
May one of them
and it's
rest in
cool.
peace.
And then we actually played zombie part a little bit different. Like
That's
we
fun.
changed sort of the timing on it, so it's kind of neat.
Does the groups you play with, they have any music released that someone could go check out if they wanted to?
Yeah, the Daniel Burns Band. We've got some stuff on Spotify.
Oh.
Daniel Burns Band and Cable Drums, right? Are you?
Yep.
Do you have a .com on that one?
I do.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't know
cabledrums.com.
that. Okay, cool.
By the way, I just also want to throw this out because part of your sageness is reflected in the fact that you have raised a son, sent him off into the world, and jbofilm.com. So his son is a world famous filmmaker.
Yeah.
I thought I'd throw this out to Thomas sometimes mid episode. So this is from Jabo,
You're in it.
jbofilm.com. Yeah. Quite an illustrious cast.
It is. We got to get a zoom on that.
Or we'll do a link later.
Oh, that's good. That's a better
That's
idea.
actually one called Matt Man.
Would you send that to me?
I will.
Oh, that'd be
of
awesome.
course.
So, okay, actually, I wanted to play a little game real fast. So, cue the.
Because we got to test,
Music.
is he truly a sage?
That's right. Well, it just
And can he react on the
this is
fly?
more like relating to the younger generations. The first thing. So, I give it time for the music for the little theme song to play. That's right. Do we know what the word "riz" means, gentlemen?
My daughter's used that word, and I've asked her. I'm trying to think. It's like kind of like cool, sort of like it's Riz. It's
You're warm. You're warm. Do you know what it means?
I don't. I would say it's. I think I've heard him using it. Now it's a coolish. How would you more specifically define
Well, the Riz stands for charisma.
charisma?
And
Okay,
it
yeah,
means
yeah,
exactly
yeah.
that.
okay.
It means exactly that.
Gotcha.
How about sus?
Heard it. Not really
Yeah.
thought much about the meaning though.
Suspect.
Yeah, that's
suspect.
a little sus. Yeah.
All right, I got one more for us, and that is no cap.
Ooh, can't say I heard that.
No clue.
No cap means I'm not lying.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. I'm gonna pick my audience
Yeah.
very
I'm
specifically.
gonna drop that on my daughter. She'll hate it. She'll hate it.
Yeah. Oh, they love it when you do that, right?
You know, what's interesting is a little teaser into what we're going to be talking about today. But so I'll give my little teaser, and then I really want to get to know you a little bit better. Just like there's unique terms that younger generations are now saying that kind of separate the boomers and Gen Xers from the millennials and Gen Z. There's not just terms, but there's also philosophy of life that can differ, that can make us differ. And one area that is very polarizing at the moment is work. I feel like there's a battle going on between work and the battle lines drawn between these generations. But even in the younger generation, there's different philosophies for work and the purpose of work and what's the best way to have a fulfilling life. So that's going to be a big part of our conversation today. And that's one of the things that we talked about, that you mentioned when I asked you about Command Podcasts in the first place. You're like, I really want to talk about work. Before we jump right into that, I'm curious, can you tell us when were you born and what was your young years like? What was going on in the world? What was going on in your world? What was going on in your young adult years? And how did work play its part in your development?
I was born in 1972, and so kind of grew up in the
Perfect year for the Dolphins.
Yeah, it was. Sure. For the record, the Bucks were horrible when I was growing up, so that was
creamsicle bumps.
Yeah, it was the when I was growing up, the era of the space shuttle started, and 80s hair bands and no internet, no cell phones. The cell phone came out when I was in high school. Was like the first time I ever saw one in somebody's car. I'm sure they were out before that, but they were not common. It cost a fortune to use it. You didn't, if you got one, under threat not to use it, right? It's kind of like homeowners insurance.
Yeah.
Like you have to have it, but don't use it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it was, movies was entertaining, car stereos were a big thing, growing up. So yeah, that was kind of like my high school and school growing up, but let's see what you say, young adult as I started, I got married young. So
how young?
I was 21.
21? Well, I feel like in that day and age, okay, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like 18 was young, 20, 21 was that kind of normal for back in the day?
Well, I mean, my wife was 8, so that was the thing.
Wait, what's the range?
Hold on.
No.
Okay, wait.
I would agree with 21 being young.
It was out of the country.
Okay.
There are sightings of 18-year-olds, but 21 is pretty dang young.
Yeah, it was. But the thing was, my wife and I, she was only 2 years behind me, but we dated for 5.5 years before we got married.
That's what I thought I'd remembered about.
So high school sweethearts.
Yeah.
Even almost pre-high school.
She was 14.
Yeah.
When we first started.
Nice.
Interesting.
Yeah.
For better, for worse, that enables you to traverse the adult world differently.
So 21 does sound young, but when you think of it, we had spent so much time together prior to that. I think the only thing about getting married young that you can't compensate for is the fact that, you're still sort of developing as a person.
That's right.
And, people that, get married later might have a better handle on kind of who they are and what they're looking for in a person.
The only quality that would have helped is somebody who's patient and loving enough that as you transition, they were just going to stick it out with you.
Yeah, yeah.
But to be upset later that you somehow transitioned or had different interests you didn't even know about at the time, it's like, well, in fairness, I was really young.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what happened with us. We're just trying to figure it out as we go.
Yeah.
I came out of high school, went to college to go into ministry, did that full time.
Oh, I
graduated, went to seminary, Dallas Theological Seminary. Huh. And, my wife thought she was marrying a pastor, and, a series of events happened and we had an opportunity to be part of a church plant and it required us to be bivocational. And I stumbled into the technology field and just fell in love with it and sort of loved the freedom of, being able to serve in the areas I wanted to serve and not just be on staff and have to do everything that is involved with being on staff. Sure. So, so that was, that was a change. My wife had to, and it was okay. I mean, we did fine, but to be fair, she thought she was marrying a pastor and she ended up marrying an IT guy.
All great examples of that flexibility because you're still in that zone where you just don't know.
Right.
No matter what somebody says, I promise you I will be this. It's like, well, yeah, you're young. You don't know.
Right. Still figuring it out.
Interesting. Yeah. So, work was all a part of that. Like, obviously, you had anticipated to do one thing and you transitioned to another.
Right.
And what was your perception of work as a young adult, especially a young married man? What was your perception of work, and has it changed from then to now?
Well, I grew up in the whole. I mean, it's still true, but you provide for your family. You have to have something stable, something reliable. My dad worked for the General Telephone Company for 21 years or something like that, and you didn't bounce around from job. And I haven't. I tend to, when I work somewhere, I tend to stay until when you're young. You do the I packed produce and did all that when I was a kid. Of course, you do this for a few years and move on. But once I got into my career, you stick it out, you make an investment in where you're at. So, and I think that's something that I see is sort of changing. A lot of the younger people that I work with, they bounce around from place to place, and sometimes it's for advancement, and sometimes it's just, I think, out of boredom. They want to do something else. They're moving on. Where I sort of came from, the generation that you ride it out. There's good times and there's bad times, and there's days where you just feel like I can't do this anymore. And it's like, well, I just need a good night. Let me get a night's sleep. Good night. And the next day, it's like, I'm fine. I'm okay. I can do this.
So a little context for where you work at, and you can give away as many details as you want, or we can keep it somewhat vague, vanilla. You're in the tech world, but you're interacting with judges and lawyers and the law system pretty consistently. Pretty fair to say, right?
Sure.
So when you say work, you're familiar with the working lives of, I would say it's a sector of our society which pretty vital, professional, if you will. In other words, if I was to give my speech on, my heart for marketplace, but you find out I'm actually just flipping fries in the back room, you're like, Robert, sure, that's just really do you really interact with other human beings who are making serious career decisions? Or you've had a catbird seat to watching people's careers over a couple of decades now, right?
For sure.
Whether, and again, people who went to law school or had to get voted for their office or had to put a lot of energy into getting where they're at. So I do think that speaks into your perspective. The Lord's been able to use that. So as we talk about work life today, you bring that to this conversation. So definitely glad you're here with us.
Yeah, I guess I started off in the IT field, and just sort of kept advancing and increasing my skills. I was an engineer, data center engineer for the better part of my career, and then about 3 years ago, I took a chief technology officer position, so I'm more involved in the management side. But so yeah, I mean, I've gone from being the young kid that's trying to figure it out, and all the way up until now, I'm hiring people and having to train them, and
that's interesting.
Watching them retire.
Do you feel like there's I've been looking at a lot of videos, and people distinguish the term job and career. Do you feel like there's a distinction, or do you think they're synonymous?
I do think there's a distinction. I mean, a job can be, sometimes you take a job because you have to pay the bills. You have to provide, and it could be something that you're not really interested in. It's just something that you had to do at the time, to pay the bills. Where when I think of a career, I think of more of something that is, this is what you chose to do. This is something that you want to invest in to become better at and to develop those skills.
So like you might have many jobs under a certain field, but that one field defines your career. Like it's like a sales or being a lawyer, or
I think careers have a path, and so, say that, well, like in my case, let's say your goal in life was to be a chief technology officer, right? Well, you don't just start off at that, and you need to know a little bit about technology. And like the typical path in IT is you start off at like a help desk, you're answering phone calls. Then you might kind of move into desktop support where you're going out and, putting the equipment out on the floor. Then you can become an engineer or an administrator, like a systems administrator or a database administrator. And then I guess engineer would be above that. And, once you get into that area, you start specializing in certain things, like you're a data center specialist, or you're a cybersecurity specialist. You can be a network switch route, kind of specialist. So there's sort of a path that you go through to get where you want to be. So to say your career might be, in the IT field, but it could look different. In fact, it could even go another path would be like development, like software development.
So there are paths you could take. That makes sense. So let's get to know you a little bit. So tell us a little bit about, married young, trying to become a pastor, doing church plants, have to be bivocational. So you kind of almost fell into technology, and then you found out you loved it. Like, what were some distinct memories in that time frame? Good, bad. What are some things in that time frame? Like, help us kind of understand who you were at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always had a knack for electronics. I was the kind of the kid that would, if a radio broke, I would take it apart and try to see what's inside of it. What makes it. Not that I could necessarily fix it, but just to kind of see what it is.
Sure.
And computers actually were sort of coming out in my childhood. I mean, like I said, we didn't have the internet. When I was in college, my papers were written on what we used to call a word processor. And it wasn't until probably when I was in seminary that I got a computer. And, it was less expensive if you built them yourself. And I knew some people, so I would build a few computers here and there and work on them. There was a part of me that always knew that, like, if I wasn't going into ministry, I think I would have gone into technology.
Right.
That's something I think I would enjoy doing. And so I always just sort of had my, finger on the pulse of technology. A lot of it just was my own messing around with my own equipment. Well, when there was a period of time where we moved to another city, and so my wife was going back to college, and I had a little bit of seminary left. I only had like 2 classes, so it wasn't really a full-time situation. So I decided just to get a job to, transition that year where my wife was going back to school and where I had a little bit of schooling, but so I wasn't really ready to go on staff at a church or something like that. I wanted to kind of, finish my schooling, let her get finished. Well, I actually started working for a call center for UPS, and which is interesting when I think about my career, because UPS has a very extensive customer service training, right? And I went through the entire training, did well, just crushed their exam at the end, because I was fresh out of college. I was tuned to that type of learning, and so I did that for a while and got promoted a couple times, even at the call center. And while I was doing that, I was having a conversation with some friends, and I just made the comment. I was like, I think I could do technology. I could work on computers and in that field, but I don't have any like official experience that I could put like on a resume. Like there's nothing to show that I really am qualified to do that. I just really think I could be good at it, That was just a passing comment I was saying to a friend, Well, a few months later, they call me and say, conversation was interesting because we're going to be doing something with our business and kind of adding another sector to it where we're going to be providing more IT support. Would you be interested in doing that? And so it was a lateral move financially. They, tried to match what I was making. The reason I bring that up is the customer service training I got during that time has served me the rest of my career. I mean, the things that they teach about, how you present things and how you can say something that's not escalating.
Right.
Because, you deal with a lot of unfortunate situations with
they're having a rough day sometimes.
And, of course, UPS, you're talking to people that their packages are lost or, they're late. So it's amazing in the things that I deal with in my job, how much I still kind of refer back to that training and customer service. So that was a key moment in my career, was actually that little detour through that UPS call center.
Yeah.
Actually, that kind of leads me to one of my questions for you, which is what's one of the worst and one of the best career choices that you've made in your life?
Well, I think one of the best choices that I made was that I invested heavy early on in my career. Like when I decided I was going to go into the IT field and I got an opportunity to start doing it, I was all in. I mean, I tried to learn everything I could learn. I volunteered to do, if somebody needed computer help, I would be at their house helping them. If there was something going on at work that I could get involved in that I hadn't done before, I'm looking over their shoulder, trying to understand and learn. And I studied. I mean, there's a lot of books and documentation in technology field. There are degrees in technology and those are great, but there's also these certifications that are pretty hefty.
Yeah.
And I went through several of those and learned a ton. It's like going to college, preparing for some of these certifications. So that was a big one too, that I did all that early on in my career. And, when I was at home, I mean, it was almost a form of entertainment. I mean, like, I can watch TV or I can read up on this product. And to me, that was just as interesting as watching TV. Right. So I think that was probably one of the best things I did was invest very heavily. I was, at the time we didn't have kids. And so, it wasn't like I was taking time away from my children, to do this. But I leaned in really hard to try to get the skills.
You got your 10,000 hours in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the combination of, talk about job versus a career, or back in the old days, they would call it a calling. Do Christians have a calling, or do they just work gigs and put food on the table? So you did share with friends just a wee bit of honesty in terms of, what, I kind of like this stuff, right? So just being honest, we have a group that we lead, and it's talking about the difference between sharing stuff and then being vulnerable. So kind of being vulnerable and go, I know I'm this seminary guy, and y'all probably have me pegged for this certain ministry track, but I am curious about technology. To share that enabled a friend to go, he logged that in his mind, and then when something come up, it could happen. Whereas if you'd have kept that to yourself, then your friend would have never thought twice about you for that role. Right. And then your 10,000 hours, shout out to Malcolm Gladwell, that idea of like, if you feel like the Lord's nudging you in a certain field, get really good at it, especially on the front end. Right. There's a lot of that front load you have to do. Yeah. And you may or may not get paid in those. I mean, nobody's paying you to sit around in your evenings and read these silly information books.
And I don't even know at the time that I realized how beneficial that was. Mm-hmm. But where I'm at now, and I'm seeing people come into that role, and I'm not just talking about this generation. I mean, I knew people back then that this happened with as well, that they would just do what they were asked to do.
Right.
And that was it. Like, they were supposed to answer the phones, they would answer the phones. And if the phone wasn't ringing, they were just sitting there, surfing the internet, doing whatever. They were doing their job. I mean, they did what they were asked to do, but it wasn't like they were really investing in trying to advance.
Right.
And, even today, sometimes I'll have talks with, my staff and because they're doing really good at their job, but it's like, where do you see this like going through?
Right.
Because we should start working on that.
Yes.
Too, even though, I mean, I don't have a position right now, but, where do you want to go eventually?
Yes.
Whether it's here or somewhere, whether it's where we work now or whether it's somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because one thing I have learned is that your best employees are the ones that are growing.
Right. That's right.
And even if it means they eventually leave, I would rather have an employee that's growing and eventually leave than have stagnant employees that are just not trying to learn anything.
So your headspace, two people. One is thinking, you know what? Flipping the brain off. When I show up Monday morning, I'll see what boss man tells me to do. Mm-hmm. And then the other person is like, let me read up on this. Let me study up on this. Right. Let me interview some guys who have these roles. And then, as you say, even if that person moves on, it is about personal development and viewing your roles as like having a curiosity and having a more of a desire for learning. And you're like, I don't even know how I'll be using all this stuff, but I want to learn it. Yeah. I want to learn it. And then that is part of your heart and your brain development. And then down the line, sure enough. But if some of it does, you narrowed it down to a certain field.
Right.
So you can't study everything on the planet. You got to hone it down just a little bit.
And I experimented a little bit in that early part of my career in that for about 6 months, I went down the developer track to be a software developer. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. At the time, the company I was working for, my position had pretty much grown to be as much as it could be. They didn't have a need for, anybody at a higher level. However, the software developers, there was an enormous need for that. And there was a lot of potential for growth in that area. So I thought I'd give it a try. So for about 6 months, I started doing software development, and I absolutely hated it. I could not stand it. I was at the same company, and so I kept gravitating back towards my old job. Even though they had hired somebody to replace me, I found myself going back and helping that person and staying involved. And and then finally one day I just had the honest conversation with my boss that like, hey, I just don't think
within this field, there's this one specific stream, and I don't think I belong in that stream.
Right. Here's the interesting thing about that. Again, I didn't enjoy it. But that 6 months I spent learning SQL queries and report writing and all of that, to this day, it helps me. Even when I was a data center engineer and I had to talk to a software developer, I could talk to them on their level because they were like, I could identify problems in their, search query that I could point out to them. And because, the symptom to me would be the server, the processor's pegged and it's running really slow. And it's, of course, the developers are like, well, the software's doing what it's supposed to do. It's just slow. It must be your hardware. And we're looking at the hardware and going, yeah, but this thing's a beast. And I can see the process that's taking up it's the search that's taking up all the resources. And so, I had just enough knowledge to go in and look and say, hey, you got a bad query here or something, And so I guess the reason I point that out is, I think, you should kind of experiment and learn a little bit about the different areas, especially within that field. If you know what your career field's going to be, be familiar with all of it to some extent, because it'll just make you a better whole person.
That was not wasted time. It was not a failure.
Yeah.
But you learned what you don't want us to focus on.
Yeah, the trend that I'm hearing you say is like nothing has gone to waste, and for good reason. And part of that's probably a mindset, dedicating yourself to something and to learn how it applies to other things you're doing, but also just it's all within the same family.
Yeah. That's the truth, even seminary.
I wanted to set the table because we are talking about work and professional.
Is this where you get nasty? Are you going to turn nasty?
Yeah, I said before the podcast, I'm going to get really nasty.
Like, you're just going to come hard at like generational differences?
Yeah.
Are you going to lampoon like the stereotypes of each one?
Maybe. We'll see.
Go at it.
Actually, go ahead and throw in a comment. What are some work trends that you see amongst your friends and your family and maybe even yourself? What is the philosophy that you take towards careers versus jobs, or even just your own personal development?
What other generation do you blame for your lack of moving forward?
There you go. Well, okay, so let's set the table. Who's
to blame?
Like I said, I think there's this battle line between these generations. People from my generation are looking at the workforce. They're applying for hundreds, if not thousands of jobs, getting no callbacks, even though everybody's hiring. We are seeing, as things are unfolding, it's like, well, it doesn't matter if I have a 4-year degree. It doesn't matter if I do this. For whatever reason, they're not giving me the callback. And meanwhile, they're looking at the status that people in the other generations have, and that they see, who are the CEOs? Who are the presidents? It's still boomers. There's no younger presidents getting elected. It seems like, from a younger perspective, it seems like all these older generations are kind of living behind the horse at our expense, and so that seems very unfair. And so that mentality has kind of devolved into two major work philosophies. One is quiet quitting. Quiet quitting, essentially, by definition, is I'm going to do exactly to the letter what my job description says. I will do no more. I will do no less. But if we're being honest, it's probably a little bit less sometimes. I'll do no more than it says, and I will not work more than the set amount of hours the contract says I'm going to work. Because in their mind, they're thinking, well, this job is not my whole life. My whole life belongs at home, with my family, with my friends. I have a whole other world outside of this. This is just allowing me to provide for this. There's the other mindset, which is I see how the work trend has been going, and this is unfortunately very true, where everyone is understaffed, no one's hiring, and everyone's getting pummeled with more and more responsibilities and not being compensated for it. At least that's a trend that I've seen in my work experience. And so that is one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is the hustle culture, which is, yes, we're working on an uphill battle, but if I am willing to sacrifice my home life, my relationships with my family and friends, if I'm willing to sacrifice my first marriage and and to sell my first children, then at some point in the future, I will be able to live high on the horse and do whatever I want to do. And because ultimately it comes down to this thought of like, well, I can't do whatever I want because I don't have any money. So I'm going to sacrifice my time in exchange for money, but now I still can't do whatever I want because I don't have any time. And so a lot of people are looking at older generations saying, well, they have their cake and they're eating it too. And that's not very fair. Meanwhile, I think, and meanwhile, while all this is going on, the perception from our view to the older generations is they think we're lazy when it seems like we're working harder than ever. And so at least that's a perspective from the younger generations. I'm curious. I don't feel like maybe I'm the right person to share the perspective of work and the perspective of younger and older generations from your point of view. I'm curious if that's the canvas for my generation, what's the canvas for your generation?
Well, that's a lot that you just said.
It is. Oh yeah.
But one of the things that you mentioned the whole idea that I'm just going to go and do what I'm asked to do. I'm going to put in 40 hours, and I'm not going to do any more than that. So, okay, first of all, 40 hours a week is a huge part of your life. I mean, you can't just say like, this is just my job and then I have a life outside of this. Your job is part of your life, right? That's a significant amount of your life. To just dismiss those 40 hours a week of your life for 40 years,
it's a pretty sad view of life.
That's a big chunk of your life that you're just saying is pointless.
That's a very interesting point.
And so I think I think part of that is looking at that as, okay, embracing the fact that this is part of my life. Okay?
There you go. That's
and
good.
what am I going to do with it?
Yeah.
What purpose is it going to serve for me? The 40 hours a week thing, obviously there are some jobs that are hourly, right? And maybe you're not allowed to work more than 40 hours a week because, they don't want to do overtime or whatever. I think, rather than point out, whether it's 40 hours or 50 hours or however much, I think to me, it matters what you're doing during that time. Maybe you're only allowed to work 40 hours a week, but are you giving them a solid 40 hours? Are you doing as much as you can? Maybe you don't put in extra hours, but you could do things that are beyond, what you're asked to do. And
so someone might say, well, why would I do that when there's no reward?
Well, that's the thing is there is reward, and it's on multiple levels. One thing I've learned is that you never know who you're going to end up interacting with in the future. So the boss you have right now might be willing to just work your fingers to the bone with no reward. But that assistant manager that sees you and he's going to move on and start his own company.
That's right.
He's going to go work at, Tico and get a management position, and he's going to be looking for somebody to hire. And he's going to think about the people that he knew were willing to just get it done, and that's, we underestimate the impact that it has, on the people around us when we put in the extra effort and do, it's, and also I think it's important for your own self-worth to be, again, 40 hours a week, big chunk of your life. Don't you want to be proud of what you did during that time? I mean, don't you want to feel like you did a good job, during that? Because it's good for your self-esteem. It's good for your ego. You grow as a person. You learn how to do things that will serve you, like when I was doing the customer service training, like I did, we had these exams and like, I want to get 100% every time, like that was my goal. Right. And well, was there a reward? The person that, just skimmed by with a 76 or whatever. They got the same job I did, it was the same pay
for that year.
Right. But I learned something, and I did, my best. And like I said, those skills served me later in life. The earlier jobs in your career are good practice for later on. I mean, that's where you learn how to interact with people and learn how to teamwork. And so as involved as much as you can contribute, it is going to have a reward down the road because you're going to grow as a person and you're going to feel better about yourself. And
here's a question for you guys, which is should everybody have a career? And when I ask that, it's based on the premise that you want to develop yourself professionally so that you can maybe open the door for this, but maybe someone doesn't want to do that. Maybe someone just wants to stay exactly where they are. doesn't want to change. And so to what benefit, if they don't want to have a career, they just want that job, to what benefit is it to go above and beyond?
Well, hypothetically, if there is a God, and he is the creator, and he calls us to co-create, he says of us, he designed us to be co-creators.
Yes.
If you put the math together, A plus B would equal C. He has not promised that you clocking in at 9 and leaving at 5 and saying, well, I only do this so that they give me a paycheck. He goes, bet you won't be satisfied with that mentality.
Yeah.
I bet it won't work for you because I've called you to more. So I do, Gallup did a lot of research on this, Clifton, it has to do with anybody has the potential to get really good at something. You could have been 100 years ago and your thing is just harvesting wheat. But if you've watched somebody who's really gotten good at their craft, you and I might belittle it and make it sound like it's something silly and menial and it doesn't matter. But if you see somebody who's really good and really loves what they do, you're like, dang, that girl, she put into it. And that guy, like, he loves his job. And so if your brain is designed to always want to think like, how can I do it more efficiently, faster, have more fun, enjoy the people I'm working with. So yeah, I would kind of say this is a shout out to God Most High. So if you are lost as a goose and you don't believe it, that there is a creator, then I don't know what to tell you. But for those of you who suspect that there is a God out there and that you were maybe created by him, then there's this part of you that wants to develop and wants to grow. And so going through life, it's a sad way to go through life. And as Cabo just mentioned, like a good chunk of your waking hours are productive, whether you like it or not. You're doing stuff. You're washing dishes. You're getting paid. You're not getting paid. You're helping your neighbor mow a lawn. So to kind of go through life and think, well, man, this is just all like, it's a box I gotta check. I mean, it's like, yeah, but most of your life was miserable? I don't encourage that thinking.
Well, and you also have to keep in mind, the economy changes and businesses change.
Comes and goes.
And so the guy that does, or the person that goes above and beyond and is the most efficient, you can make 20 widgets in the same amount of time that it takes somebody else. They can only make 10, whatever, right? And immediately you say, well, we're getting paid the same. What's the difference? Well, the difference could be that one day they're going to have to make some cuts.
That's right.
And who are they going to hang on to?
Yeah. Or your widgets tend to not have flaws, and the bum is just checking in, checking out.
Right.
He's got snags in his widgets, and we're like, you know what? We're getting too many of our widgets rejected by the customers. It's just not worth it anymore.
And it's not always just about productivity either. It's also about how you interact,
Treating humans,
how you contribute to the environment.
Yeah.
One of the coolest things I ever learned, I met, one time I had an opportunity to meet the drummer that recorded Christina Aguilera's Beautiful. And his name's Tommy Ricard. And he gave us, it was a drum camp that I was a part of that he came and he was hanging out with us. And somebody had asked him, what's the key to being successful as a studio drummer? And he said there's 3 things. He said, number 1, be on time. Number 2, be prepared. And number 3, be easy to work with.
There you go.
He said, if you do those 3 things, you'll never go without.
Don't they always want that guy to come back?
and that resonated with me when I heard that, because I thought, well, that doesn't just apply to drumming. That applies to everything.
Yeah.
First of all, show up.
Yeah.
Right? Be there. And, be ready to do your job when you get there and be easy to work with. And
well, I'm curious. So what would you say to the other extreme, the hustle culture? Because in theory, that embodies everything that we're kind of talking about. It's like proactive, go above and beyond, dedicate yourself to something, pursue it as hard as you can.
So far, you named good qualities. Were the negative ones wired in there?
Well, yeah. So I guess the immediate flaw that I would see with the hustle culture is at the cost of everything else, at the cost of life.
Well, yeah. By the way, nobody ever promises to destroy their first marriage and ruin their first set of kids. So, I would never not hustle. Like if I was talking to someone in their early 20s and they're hustling, I'll be like, that's what I like about you. So when you use the word hustle, I'm like, you do know I think of that as a positive word, right?
Right.
So everything you said, I'm really for. And then the whole excessive part, I'm like, well, yeah. So you're saying it's like most things in life, balance, right? So if somebody, but that's always true for anything. If somebody goes, I want to be in a position of authority. But by the way, along the way, I will become a jaded, horrible dictator in the workplace. And, well, yeah. Did you know that we didn't want to throw in that with it? And you don't have to include that. So you can hustle, and certainly you still got to set your own boundaries. You can hustle and you can still, he mentioned seasons of life. When you don't have kids, there's certain boundaries you don't have to worry about. But what is your spouse's definition of boundaries? So you still got to work through that of like, she might, I like how you kind of deflected the whole, is it 40 hours or is it so many hours? I mean, it's such an arbitrary number. Most of Europe is averaging 35 and America thinks 40 and we're wondering about this, that, and the other. But I like how Cabo approached it is that it's really not an hourly amount. I do know people who work probably 60 to 70 hours, but they're not jerks. And their wives actually like them. And they like them being around. And their kids even like them.
Right.
But there's some people who can do 70 hours well, and there's some people.
And you know why they like them? It's because that person is fulfilled.
Exactly.
They've accomplished something that they're proud of.
There you go.
And so now, maybe, they work 60 hours instead of 40. So that's 20 hours that didn't go toward family and friends. But when they get with family and friends,
there you go.
They're present. They're happy.
They're enjoyable to be around.
Yeah.
Well, the guy who just clocked in and did his 40 hours, and it's again the stereotype, and then plops on the couch and turns on the television, and you're like, he only works 40 hours. He has a balance. I'm like, he's a miserable son of a gun to be around. Like, I don't want to be in his house. And but he only did 40 hours. It's the math, the 40 year versus say 60 or 70 had really.
And when it comes the whole hustle thing, I think the thing that comes to my mind is you have to ask, so why are they doing it?
There you go.
Right? Because there's different motivations for that hustle. There's the one hustle that's I'm going to, become great at my craft and I'm going to do an excellent job and I'm going to help my company get over this hurdle, this obstacle that we're trying to deal with. But honestly, I've known, earlier in my career when I was working late and staying and doing things, after hours, part of IT requires after hours work anyway. And I would notice that it was usually guys that were always there late.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go by their office and maybe speak to them. And sometimes they were reading, a newspaper.
Right.
They were on.
It's not productivity. It's just being late.
It's like I realized at some point that I think they don't want to go home.
Right. Exactly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And some of them were working, but for the same reason. And I thought, that's not necessarily a characteristic I want to embrace. I get that they're putting in a lot of time for the company, but it's why are they doing it?
Right.
And like you said, sometimes it's because you want to be in control and you want to, rule the world, right? You can hustle for that reason too. Why are you spending all that time and trying to invest, in a career when if you do have a family, you do have kids,
that's
and
right.
It should be,
Many men and women, but particularly men, when the relationships aren't being developed at home, they use work. That's where they hide. Mm-hmm. And let's pretend like it's the boss man's fault or the company's fault, and it's like got nothing to do with the company. In fact, the company is saying, if you're good at your job, shouldn't you be done by now?
Right.
You're just hanging out here using us as an excuse. You're not getting anything done. That's a good catch.
Should everybody pursue a career?
I mean, I guess it depends on how you define a career. I mean, I think everybody should have a purpose. Everybody should find something that's there. I mean, if you're fortunate enough to not need a paycheck, or much of one, I think you still should find something, a purpose to
like
life. That. I mean, it could be, helping others, or it can be, sometimes people need to do something even if they don't need the money. They just need a challenge.
That's right. Purpose.
We need to struggle to some extent to feel like we have purpose.
Yeah, and we're actually starting to scratch kind of an itch, I think, because ultimately when we're talking about motivation, even as we consider the idea of work, I think many people see work as a means to an end. It's a necessary evil, but that's not necessarily what you're arguing, is it? It's not a necessary evil. It's actually a necessity, and it's not a necessity that we are compelled to do because that's just how life is. It's actually something a little bit more ingrained in us than that, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, so even in the garden, we were designed to get work done. So like if nirvana is something about like sitting under the apple tree just eating and not walking around. No, I mean Adam's entrusted they're entrusted with they're naming the animals and they're co-creators. Again, I use that reference. Yeah, you're just not wired for that. You are wired for a purpose. I don't think I would necessarily use the word career. It doesn't bother me, but mostly I think about careers have a funny little way of disappearing on you. So, you might do something and it's like, yeah, that industry, like being a steel worker, we don't have any of those jobs anymore. So I hope that's not, when you said career, I hope you didn't put on your business card this. But yeah, the idea of getting stuff done, somehow getting stuff done, and it doesn't bother me if you're the best volunteer at your church, that's still getting stuff done, right? Or if you are financially able and you're like, yeah, it's got nothing to do with the money anymore. You do see models, and a lot of people don't have great models. I did have great models. My dad worked till he was 76, and he only stopped because later in life he needed to pay attention to working on his health once he had a cancer diagnosis. My father-in-law worked till he was 86, was a dermatologist, ran a skin clinic. And both of them, my dad said, it's a shame I have to stop working. Now, he didn't need the money a decade prior. He had actually retired at 62, but then realized literally in his own words, he's like, once you've worked on your yard for a couple of months, you realize there probably needs to be more in your life. And so he realized that, well, it's about purpose. And as long as I can do my purpose, I want to do my purpose. And so, that's just kind of the lifestyle that he lived. He never viewed it as working in the salt mine drudgery. He loved it. He filled in for a chiropractor here in town once. And the guy compensated him for doing that while the guy was away on vacation. And he told me, he goes, that guy had a great practice. I saw a lot of great patients. He goes, he gave me this, but I would have done it for free. I just love doing it. And my father-in-law, when he retired at 86, begrudgingly, he said, it's such a shame. I know I need to stop doing it now, but it's such a shame I have to stop now. So like there is like this, there's the joy of work. Work is a joy. And that's a big mental flip, because if you grow up in a home and your dad just begrudgingly goes to work and your mom really hates the company, then that's a certain mindset. And it's like, well, but you realize that's like a lot of things we pick up either from a bad church life or a bizarre family life. And it's like, yeah, but what does God have to say? So certainly productivity, certainly getting stuff done and looking forward to it and enjoying it.
Yeah. And, I was thinking about the way you had worded, does everyone need a career? I think I understand what you're kind of getting at, and that I do think that can look different for different people. It could be a stage of life, or it could even be, when I said you need purpose, that purpose can come from different places. I had a guy one time that worked on our help desk, and he was in his late 50s, and you don't see that real often. I mean, that's, typically they try to advance and grow. And I remember asking him one time, like, is this, what you want to do? Do you want to learn more about the server stuff? I mean, do you want to advance or whatever? And he said, Kevin, I'm a single dad and I'm in a band, and music is what I love. And we play out. He said, if I can come here and just work and then go see my daughter and go play, he said, that's what I want right now.
There you go. Yeah.
He said, that's what makes me happy. He said, I have no ambitions to climb the ladder.
Right. So management roles or obligations on weekends.
Yeah. But the thing was, but he enjoyed that 40 hours. He enjoyed that experience working in IT. It was something. So, your passion could possibly be something that's not your career or your job. So maybe you have a job and it does pay the bills and it's a significant part of your life. I mean, like we said, it's 40 hours a week. I mean, you can't ignore that. But maybe the real joy of their life is what they do afterwards. Maybe it's, they serve with Habitat for Humanity or maybe it's a season of life where they've got 4 kids and that's what they're investing in. They're all in, right?
That's right.
So I don't think that, when we talk about career, like I don't know that it has to be, your job has to be the strongest passion in your life. It is for a lot of people, but I don't know that it has to be that. But I think that it's a part of your life that you can't ignore. And I don't think you just want to slop through it. I think you want to, be good at it and you want to establish your worth because that's a huge part of your identity. And, when you talk about retiring and him saying it's a shame that he had to stop working, when you become really good at something and you do it for a long time, it's a huge part of your identity.
That's right.
And to say, and I mean, even me transitioning from being a data center engineer into management, like there was a part of me that was just kind of like, I was so proud of being an engineer.
Right.
And I felt like I was so good at it.
Yeah.
And then to move into like management, everybody's like, I'm rolling my eyes at the old idea of
a little bit of an identity crisis.
and even I still struggle with it. Like I'm more proud of saying I was a data center engineer for 20 years. I'm more proud of that than saying I became the CTO. Because it's such a huge part of what I did that I'm proud of.
Yeah.
So I think that does look different for everybody. I mean, I don't think that you don't have to live and breathe your job. I mean, you can enjoy other things in life too. But when it's all said and done, you just want to be responsible in that time. What we had talked about. When you take a job, you've agreed to do something for pay in return. I always think of it like we're all self-employed if you think about it.
Yeah.
I may have one customer, right, that I've agreed that I have a contract with to say I will work 40 hours a week and I'll get these benefits and this pay, but I agreed to do that. And, I think I grew up, my dad, used to talk about his grandfather saying, hey man, if you agree to do something for $10, then do your best for $10. I mean, if $10 wasn't enough, you shouldn't have agreed to it.
Right. That's right.
But you did agree to it.
You sometimes will eat a deal, but you got to do, the deal's the deal.
Right. And so that's where you get into, people get bent out of shape about salaries and things like that. Like you mentioned the fact that, why do these people, get to sit at the top and make all this money?
They were able to buy their house for $30,000 back in the day, and now I make less than them per capita, and it cost me $300,000.
Right. But if they've worked to a certain point in their life, they negotiated that as part of their compensation and their pay, and you negotiated what you did. Now if you have more worth and you have more to contribute, then I think you consider that either by going to your employer and renegotiating, or if sometimes we have opportunities to transition to other places and make more and get more compensation. But the bottom line is whatever you agreed to do, you should do it for that price. You keep your word and stay true to what you agreed to do. So.
First, Colossians 3:23, whatever you do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men. And it's interesting because in Colossians and in Ephesians, there's the same grid of towards your spouse, love looks like this. Towards your kids, it looks like this. Towards your parents, it looks like this. It goes through the grid of people in your life. And work gets mentioned, because it says, hey, if you're the boss man, you better treat those folks as if you recognize you're under the authority of the Great One. And then if you are just low man on the totem pole, you recognize, you know what, do it heartily, like what you were just saying, do it heartily. The other word that comes up is not just eye pleasing, not just while boss man's watching, but you're doing it knowing that, no, I'm going to do right by boss man. Even if he was gone on vacation for 2 weeks, it's not the cat's away, the mouse will play. It's like, nope, I said yes to this person before the Lord. And this is something that I will heartily take care of. So that people, and man, when you get an employee like that, as you mentioned, you will be stalked by your managers the rest of your life. And I mean that in a good way. They will always refine you, right? Like they're always like, hey, Kevin, can I talk you into this? Because I just need someone who shows up on time, shows up prepared, and is enjoyable to work with, right?
Yeah.
So they know that about your character. But the Lord says, and if you will, this is like, if you define discipling isn't just a 16-week course you go through, but it's in every relationship of your life. How do you show love? And we often don't think of like our relationship towards an employer as love, but Paul doesn't let us wiggle around. He's like, you know what love looks like to your employer? Even if it doesn't matter if he's a jerk, doesn't matter if he's kind of rude, doesn't matter if he yells at you sometimes. Love towards him is you do your work heartily, right? So, because he doesn't need hugs and kisses. He just needs people who show up and do what they say they're going to do. So it is an act of love and vice versa. If the Lord puts you in those management roles, or he puts you as the school teacher developing these young children, or a principal, or you name it, he goes, you might sometimes think you're on the bottom of the totem pole. You might sometimes think you're a hot shot, but I have words for both of you. I'm the one who places you there. It's for your own personal development, and it's to bless the people that are around you. So is it blessing to ever work with somebody who just kind of shows up and puts in their time and doesn't really care about the product? No, that's not fun. Life's a drudgery. We don't like to work with those kind of people. And again, if you don't like the price tag, then that's called don't take the job.
Yeah.
Don't
That's
take
an
the
interesting
job.
point. I guess I consider those who are working in restaurants as waitresses and waiters, and those who are working retail. Maybe they're at Best Buy just trying to.
Do we still have Best Buy? No,
Yeah, they're around.
no
They're still
defamation
around.
of Best Buy.
They're still around. Yeah. These jobs, and they're thinking like, I literally just have this job so I can pay the bills, but I do not want to do this forever. And I'm looking for a way out. What's our advice to somebody maybe in that boat who's like, well, where do I go from here? I know I hate what I do. I'm going to try to do my best, but I really don't want to.
Yeah. Well, I think long term, you need to figure out what you are interested in, right? What you do want to do.
Yeah.
And that's, you probably need to keep the job you have to pay your bills. And if you want to keep your job, you should be a good employee. You should work hard. You should show up on time. Be prepared. Be
Do the
easy
big
to
three.
work with.
We're going to call those the big three from now on. Do the big three.
I like
Yeah,
that.
and don't underestimate that last one. Be easy to work with. That's the key. We've all dealt with people that are not easy to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, we avoid them at all costs. It's like, but then there's those people that you're just like, I know if I work over there, they're gonna.
The role I'm currently, it's funny,
Yeah.
the role I'm currently in, there's a lot of things that you could point to, like paths and how the Lord develops and how it all happens. But literally, the guy that I immediately answer to, who I worked with previously, he's like, word for word, he says, life is just too short to work with people I don't enjoy being around.
Yeah. Sometimes you don't get to choose who all you work with, right? So what I always do is I try to find some redeeming quality
Yeah, there you go.
in a person. Try to get to know them. Most of the time, people that annoy you or that you don't care for, the more you get to know them, most cases,
That's right.
if you would just get to know them, you would start to enjoy them. You would see that characteristic in them that's, okay, yeah, they're abrasive and they're harsh, but that's not really what they're intending. It's just a personality thing, and they're actually very committed to their job.
Yeah,
They're very loyal. They're very honest. And you start seeing things about them that,
Right.
and then And then when, there's the funny person that tells all the great jokes that we enjoy being around. But then when you look at this other person, you just think, man, she's the most loyal person that we have. She's the most dependable person we have. And it's like, she's a little rough around the edges, but push comes to shove, she's the person that'll get the job done. You just find something that's redeeming because, to your point, life is too short to just, dislike everybody that we look at or see. We got to find a way to, and some people make it so much more challenging than others.
Right.
Usually, in my experience, I can usually find something about a person that I could say, all right,
that's good.
They're good at this.
We're going to call that the Will Rogers principle. Now, because Thomas is under the age of 40, we have to define most of our terms. So Will Rogers was famous. He's way before my time as well, so don't say I was around back then. But he was famous for saying, I never met a man I didn't like, which sounds a bit like, wow, that's a stretch. I can think of a few that'd be very hard to do that. But you're right, Kevin. If you take the time, I use the word curious, like if you bother to be curious enough to kind of scratch behind the surface. Like most jaded people, maybe they speak crassly, and then you find out, yeah, she had her first kid when she was 14. Like, she did not get to finish school.
Yeah.
She's just scraping by, and she's scared.
Yeah.
So sometimes she's not pleasant to be around. But now I'm learning to love her for who she is, because I'm like, you know what, I get it. And it doesn't, I'm okay with you being a little rough around the edges.
Yeah, because you realize that she's actually an amazing person.
Exactly.
Like, what she has accomplished is phenomenal.
That's right. Learn to applaud the fact that she has that perseverance thing. So yeah, I like that. Because especially on those maybe those more entry level jobs where you are thrown together, you don't get to pick. How many times have you seen somebody quit a job and they said it was because there was an annoying person on the team? And you're like, well, where did you think you were going to go that you were not going to have any annoying people? Like,
and that annoying person probably left the week after.
Yeah, that's right. Oh man, I've seen that happen. I've seen that happen. I've seen big major moves. Somebody fleeing one person on the team, and it's like, that guy quit the week after you. Like maybe you should have just hung in there just a little longer.
I feel like this conversation will have to be continued. And actually, if there's something that was said or something that wasn't said that you would like to hear, leave a comment. Tell us what's on your mind, and would love to. Maybe we could do some kind of Q&A. That'd be really interesting.
Yeah,
like
Q&A.
We'll consolidate all the questions, and then we'll spend some time on that. That could be a lot of fun.
I'd like to throw out when you say hustle culture or when you say hustle, does that connotate positive images or negative images?
For me, the negative, because I see the toxic parts of it.
Okay, cool.
The overly arrogant, I'm gonna pull myself up by the bootstraps. I'm gonna be like, basically, I'm gonna be my own god, and I'm gonna see my own end come to fruition, as opposed to someone who's quiet, diligent, honorable.
You're talking more like the shark, like the person that will devour everybody in their path.
Yeah, because honestly, it's like, it's funny because they're the people who want to be the shark, and you can tell they're fakers, or that's just not who they are.
Have you ever admired someone who is a hustler, but they had scratch all the negative part that you just said? Because that's like saying, he's a physician, but he's a real pain in the neck. I'm like, I don't think we want to get rid of all physicians just because you're mad at bed.
Yeah.
But like, can you think of like people who hustle?
Many.
But they're all the good qualities?
Many.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah. And ultimately, like, I suppose it's who is someone you want to be more like? What fields are there? In fact, we're going to leave some in our show notes. We'll leave some info about if you're looking for, I don't know what my career ought to be. There are resources that help you with that. Ken Coleman, his podcast, he's one of the Dave Ramsey personalities. That's his whole thing. Very, very good resource. There's certainly a lot of other resources that we'll try to put in.
Well, even in the young adult world, which you and I live in, and you have a young son who's off in LA making films left and right, and a daughter who's up and coming. But yeah, the typical 20-year-old that you and I encounter a lot, we kind of have that. That's those life transitions, right? So we have everyone from those who are doing quite well, and they're maybe early in their career, but they're moving forward, and you're like, yep, future looks bright. And then we have others who maybe are late to launch, And it's like,
I feel like
yeah, you're dipping deeper into your 20s, and man, you should have took care of this a while ago, my friend. Right? Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
So I would say of that generation, I will say this: it is an era of lots of transitions, and you can be a late learner and you can figure it out when in your 30s it dawns on you. But I think you'll also look back and go, yeah, but there's no reason why I shouldn't have done some of this while I was in my 20s. Better late than never. Better late than never. But why waste a decade?
Sure.
Why waste a decade? Because you are making decisions and you are in some of those maybe entry level roles, and you don't necessarily know the fields that you're going to lock into, and you're observing and trying to soak it all in. But yeah, that demographic in particular, as opposed to say if somebody's in their 50s and I'm having to rewire them, I'm like, first of all, bro, we're really late on this. Like, better to have a good ending than no ending at all. But I feel really bad that even if you're in your 40s and you're trying. I would say if there's a learning moment in the 40s 50s zone, it is the hustler in the negative term who looks back on his life and he realizes, well, I just wanted to impress others so much with the wealth or the title that I squandered my life, right? Or I stepped on a lot of other human beings along the way. Yeah. So those are usually like lessons of regret looking back at your 40s, 50s. But I think the 20s zone is perfect for figuring out some of the sage wisdom that Kevin's offering.
Yeah, just remember, I don't know what the statistic is, but the percentage of jobs that you get based on relationships is phenomenal.
Yeah.
We've all done the whole, we apply to Indeed to 500 jobs and we get 2, and then eventually you end up getting the job because of somebody, that you knew or somebody that you had worked with previously at another job.
Yeah.
And the reason I point that out is to say that, in those situations, they're hiring a person, not just a skill.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, there's been times where, I've hired somebody for a role that they weren't skilled at the moment, but I knew them as a person.
Yes.
And I knew they were capable of doing it.
Right.
So whether you're volunteering at church, or you're mowing your neighbor's lawn, you're babysitting, or even just the way you conduct yourself in the presence of your parents' friends and the people that, you never know who is observing and might think of you one day when it comes time, and you're a respectable person and you're dependable and you're honest and everything that you demonstrate, some random person in your life that you didn't know was even paying attention would call and just say, I know this is out of left field, but like, is there any interest? Do you think there's any interest in doing this? I think that's
a great note to wrap up on. So that's the shout out for be more human than ever. And especially a human that the Lord is working on. If you're a human that the Lord is working on, I promise you it will go well. You will have to turn down offers left and right. There is no economy that snuffs out. When you see a human and you're the guy hiring or the gal hiring, trust me, you'll find human. So pour into your humanity the part that the Lord is altering. Character traits, values, dependability, those basic core principles that any manager would be glad to build upon. Like you said, I have often seen people totally switch fields and directions and skill sets because the manager's like, I just need a reliable person. And I've observed you. And you are under observation, whether you like it or not. So that would, back to some of the rhetorical questions of earlier, of like, well, why should I bother being a decent human being? Well, will I get paid to be a decent human being? I say, well, first of all, God's always watching. Secondly, it's why live your life as a miserable human being? But very specifically, for those of you who are just very practical people, I would say people are watching you all the time.
Yeah.
And if you have true character, your character comes out. And when your character comes out, people who call them a headhunter, call them a recruiter, call them the hiring manager, they will find you. And doors will fling open for you that you never thought were possible, regardless of whether or not housing is too much or you get paid too little or this crazy boomers are taking all the good jobs. even the boomers, man, they're ready to hand things off. Trust me.
Oh, yeah.
When they see someone that they can hand it off to. And now I know there's both types. There's definitely both types, but any of them, the vast majority of them are usually like thinking like, yep, I'm still here. I love what I do. But you know what I really love is handing it off to a reliable person to take it forward. I'm totally cool with that. You know, like a huge chunk of them are out there in those decision-making posts right now. Regardless of what the news on Facebook says today.
I am curious your thoughts. Leave some comments. Has that been your experience? Has it not been your experience? Interested to hear what you have to say. Guys, thank you for this. And I think we need to do a Q&A in the future, if you're open to it.
Q&A, part 2.
Yeah.
Sure.
See you later, Cabo.
All right.
Gentlemen,
Thanks,
thank you.
CaboDrums.com, JaboFilm.com.
Yes. Yeah, and you guys see that. We're going to put it in the show notes.
Yes.
That sounds good.